All right, welcome everybody to another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio. Also, you can catch us on YouTube and Rumble. If you have any questions, you can email us at arilewishow@hotmail.com. Our guest this evening is a well-known Jerusalem socialite. He really knows a lot of inside information that he's going to share with us, along with other political opinions of his. So welcome to the program, Jeremy Dery. Jerry, welcome to the program.
It's an honor to be on the program. Thank you.
Yes, we've been trying to track you down for a long time. Third time's a charm. But
Right.
You're worth it, so we're happy to be here. You know, I noticed something you posted a few weeks ago on social media regarding a Nazi guard, 101 years old, that was finally caught. And a lot of people would say, well, look, he's 101 years old. It happened a long time ago. Is there really such a point to put him in prison? And I'm of the opinion, you have to keep in mind that this Nazi, even though he's following orders, put 100-year-old people in prison, all types of things. And I think we have to show the world that we're not going to forget that and that we are a lot stronger than we used to be. But I want to get your thoughts about it.
I think it's not really about the age or how much time has passed. I think it's more about justice. And we have to, we made a commitment in 1945 to hunt down and capture every Nazi war criminal. And I think we need to see that through and make it, and make sure that they're found, they're caught, and they're tried for the atrocities that they committed. Because literally, tons and tons of Jews and other minorities died due to the ugliness and the evilness that the Nazis perpetrated for 10 years in Europe on European soil, and we cannot let these evil deeds slip past. We have to find them, we have to catch them, we have to show the world that evilness will be punished, and we will find them.
Because it's interesting, I'm actually giving a lecture in about a week that will touch upon the Adolf Eichmann trial. And he was the last person to officially be executed by Israel. And that was the same idea of keeping Eichmann alive so we could put him on trial and show the world what happened. And now we're honestly at a place where some people have forgot that it happened, which is really scary. The numbers are atrocious. You take a look at American youngsters in college. There are people that really even doubt that it happened. What do you think would be the best way to combat this ignorance?
Right, and the other big issue is that many of the Holocaust survivors are sadly dying away.
Right.
So we have in the living memories of them, fading away. Really, the best way is to teach, hit them on the head of, teaching the Holocaust, bring them to the Holocaust Museum, showing them the different sites in Europe where the atrocities happened. The ignorance and of the Holocaust is, rapidly increasing. Many people just deny it ever existed. And, we cannot let this dark period of history be forgotten, let alone that sadly in different parts of the world, the genocide is happening again and again as we speak. But the Holocaust was truly pure evil against a certain race of people, even different minorities, but they targeted a certain race, aka the Jewish people, because of, their twisted version of who we are. And we have to make sure that this doesn't happen again. Luckily for now, we have the State of Israel, which we did not have in the 1940s. But, it's one thing that the Holocaust, education, is not as, strong in different American campuses. But it's another thing that, the professors and the leaders are not, pushing it down and ensuring that the Holocaust memories never be forgotten.
Part of the reason I started this, I didn't mean to start the interview in any type of morbid, negative fashion, but we met, at least this lifetime, the first time at a conference at the Menachem Begin Center. And that gentleman was, he wrote a book, Zionism 2.0, and he was discussing that sometimes in America, Judaism is just simply gefilte fish and the Holocaust, which I heard that I was a little bit upset, and I thought he's kind of got a point, unfortunately. So how is it that we can transition where we remember the Holocaust and how evil it was, we want to make sure it never happens again, but to talk about things other than the Holocaust? Judaism has to certainly be more than just the Holocaust. So how do we go about the transition?
Right. I agree, it's not about gefilte fish, and it's definitely not about the Holocaust.
I'm a gefilte fish fan, don't get me wrong, but it can't be just that.
Judaism is so rich and vast and so much... his history, and it spans literally from ancient times all the way up until the present time. the gefilte fish, with all my love for gefilte fish, even food-wise, it's a very small speck in the whole spectrum of Jewish food, which encompasses the Middle East and India, in Asia. That people need to learn the full gamut of what it really means to be Jewish. Even American Jews don't even understand what it means to be Jewish. And that goes from the religious traditions, the cultures, the traditions, the history, ancient Israel up until the exile, and then the rebirth of Israel in the 1940s. But this really has to be taught, and not just the simplified version of what a Judaism could technically be, which is Shabbat, gefilte fish, and dancing for the Israel Day Parade in May that American Jews have. But it's more understanding what it means to be Jewish, and the vast richness of resources that the Jewish people have, which is the timeline, literally, of when the world began up until this very present time, which is extremely rich. And there's not one single religion that has this, that has this beautiful richness, whether it's the legal aspect or the historical aspect, or the moral aspect. And you have to break it all down. And really, the proper Jewish education must be taught properly on U.S. campuses in Europe and abroad.
Again, this is our Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio, and our guest this evening is Jeremy Dery. So, Jeremy, we know that President Biden is coming in a few days. Traffic is going to be at a standstill. We're going to have a lot of issues. I recall, obviously, 5 years ago when President Trump came, and it was a very moving experience. He went to the Kotel. He was the first active president to actually beat the Kotel and put his hands on the wall, brought his family. I don't know if we're going to get that from Joe Biden or not. Maybe he will go to the Kotel, maybe he won't. But what do you anticipate from this encounter with the president coming here for the first time in his term?
Right, it'll be the first time he's going on a whole Middle East tour. He's concluding in Saudi Arabia to try and boost the gas production for all over the world due to the Ukraine war that has negatively impacted all of the economic resources around the world. But his goal really with the Middle East is to try and revive the two-state solution peace process. At the end of his trip, he's going to Bethlehem to speak to Mahmoud Abbas. He's going to meet the president and the Israeli Prime Minister Lapid, who is the interim prime minister at the moment, which means that by November 1st, there'll be a whole new coalition forming and a whole new government being formed. So it's more of a symbolic visit to show the bond, the eternal bond, the unbreakable bond between the American government and the Israeli government. And to try and show some symbolic gestures towards the Palestinians, to try and make sure that they do not resort to another cycle of violence against the Israeli people, and maybe to try and push a peace plan and strengthen the Abraham Accords, and bringing the Saudi Arabia into the Abraham Accords. But I'm assuming that he'll need an actual functioning Israeli government to fully push a peace process between us and Saudi Arabia.
Regarding this government that is transitioning, if you will, we spoke obviously with Dr. Mordechai Kedar about a year ago, and he thought that the coalition maybe last a few months. It lasted about a year. First of all, were you surprised by that, this Bennett situation that it lasted even a year?
No, I wasn't too surprised because, the parties, even though they're vastly different from the left, the right, the center, the Arab parties, they all had two unifying core factors, which was A, to topple Netanyahu, and B, to survive as a coalition. And so since they were all on survival mode, they had to make sure that they could prove themselves to the people, whether it's the economic reforms, the budget that they passed, and to provide a stable form of governance. That really was their main criteria to survive. And sadly, of course, the cracks were starting to happen because of their ideological differences. So I wasn't surprised that I was actually very happy it lasted at least a year. But now, sadly, we're under rocky turmoil, politically speaking, and the Israeli government is in flux now between going to another round of elections, and perhaps Benjamin Netanyahu, our former prime minister, might be able to form a coalition this time, a right-wing coalition, and but that's only if he can form a government and unite enough parties to form 61 seats and more.
Something I find fascinating, I brought this up to people before regarding if you want to do a comparison between United States presidents and Israeli prime ministers. So in United States history, only one time was a president reelected another time. That happened just once of all the presidents. Israel's happened 5 times. And Bibi's been prime minister, he's one of those 5 guys, 2 different times. It could be 3 different times. Is that kind of a sad state of affairs that we have to keep kind of going back to people that were already in office? We can't get new people in? Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
I think it's a bad thing. I think, frankly, Israel, governance needs new blood, needs new fresh faces. I think the younger generation, the Zionist generation already in the Knesset or in the parliament who are working and know the rules of the game should be pushed to promote themselves and to, give like fresh blood into the government. Yes, Benjamin Netanyahu has been the prime minister for 12 years, the longest serving prime minister. Yes, he's done incredible things, but he also made a government in paralysis where he couldn't form a coalition. It's been 4 times, this will be the 5th round. He could have just bowed out and not been the head of the opposition. He didn't, and so therefore there was no right-wing government, but a government that stretched the right, the left, and the Arab parties, which showed a sign of unifying factor among the Israeli public that Arabs can play a deciding factor, that they're not extremists. Mansour Abbas, the head of the Ram party, who was in charge of the coalition, of the Arab party within the coalition, said both in Hebrew and Arabic that this is Jewish land that will remain Jewish land. So, for the Israeli public, it really shows that we can unite, even if it's not just Jewish. But Benjamin Netanyahu wants to try again the 5th time to try and form a coalition and return as prime minister. But if he doesn't, I think it's time for him to, bow out.
Is Bibi, I guess I would say, his polarizing nature, where does that come from? People don't like him. Let's say they think he has an ego. They think he's not Israeli enough. They think he's too much of an elitist, whatever it is. What is the issue where people dislike Bibi? Because I don't know if it's just simply his politics. Because even people that agree with him politically don't like him very often. So what is the nature of the hatred towards Benjamin Netanyahu?
I think it also has to do with the whole corruption case that's been ongoing. Since he's been in power for 12 years, sadly, power also corrupts you.
Right.
It's sort of the name of the game. It's sort of, whether it's justified, unjustified, there's some legal matters and non-legal matters. He sort of did things that went against the legal parameters. He went on a full-scale war against the judicial system when they charged him for various corruption cases. And so he's sort of become like a renegade politician, but also because he's just been in power 12 years, there's been shady deals, whether it's legal, not justified, whatever, that just sort of goes along when you're in power way too long. And I think every stable government needs a face after 8-9 years maximum, and not more than 12 years. And that's really part of the problem that Netanyahu has, and that he also has this unbeatable presence. I think many people find it, that they're jealous of. I mean, he has really been the one person to survive each time, most time being prime minister, and also even as opposition. I mean, he's truly a Zionist survivor.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to go anywhere. And it's a pretty interesting story because when he was a soldier, it was like something out of a movie. He literally hopped on an airplane. He saved hostages. You could tell, especially in his 20s, that he had a certain love for Israel and the Jewish people that was very much in him. And it was kind of like you're saying, power corrupts. The more he got into politics, you could see that he kind of was more into himself than the country. And that's just, again, that's just the nature of the game. You're saying, so I guess it would say, you take a look, let's say Joe Biden, let's make that comparison. Joe Biden has been in politics a long, long time, even ran for president in 1988. So Johnny Carson joke about that if you want to look that up on YouTube. I want to know, what point would you say Biden's personal influence base his policies, meaning like he's a Catholic, I don't know how strict of a Catholic he is, but how much would that influence what he does versus Bibi and his Zionist beliefs, and that influence what he does? What would be the comparison?
Right. Well, I mean, Joe Biden is following the Democratic Party line with the two-state solution at the very least, and Benjamin Netanyahu is following the right-wing Zionist party line, which is, this land belongs to the Jewish people. The settlers, is Jewish land, Judea and Samaria. So there's a clear division between Joe Biden and the Democratic Party and Benjamin Netanyahu and the right-wing parties. But right now, since Lapid is current prime minister, all these tensions will be pushed to the sidelines and postponed later down the road if Benjamin Netanyahu forms a government, and even if it's a right-wing government. Right now, the government is more, in line with Joe Biden and the Democratic Party, and vis-a-vis the Palestinians, they sort of just, pushed it aside and froze that process until there's an actual government. So, right now it's both sides are on the same terms.
Lapid is a very interesting character. I heard him speak at a town hall about 5 years ago. It was in English. Very nice situation. A lot of English came, and what happened was he mentioned some interesting ideas that he seemed to be almost libertarian. He was talking about, he didn't like the idea of the government making rules regarding religion. Like, for example, he didn't like the idea of the government saying you cannot have chametz during Pesach. He said that's just something people will know not to disrespect their religious neighbor. And the same thing with fasting Yom Kippur. He doesn't like the idea that the government makes it a law you have to fast Yom Kippur. But if you're secular, don't be disrespectful to your religious neighbor, that kind of thing. I want to get your personal idea if you think that is good for the country to make it more libertarian, that the government has to do certain things in accordance with religion. If the government's going to provide bus on Shabbat or not Shabbat, they're making a decision based on religion. So I don't know how much what the government could do there or not. But in general, should the government have more, take a back seat, these kind of things, or be more, I don't know, I could just say more controlling. Maybe that'd be the word to say. What would you say about it?
The big divide between the religious sector and the public, the secular sector, is always been a major issue in Israel between what's acceptable, what's not acceptable. I do believe that short of the religious areas in Israel, like Malish, Bnei Barak, and Mea Sharim, for example, the Israeli government also needs to cater to the public sector. I mean, yes, we're a Jewish country, so we should feel like a Jewish country. They, by Jewish law, you're not supposed to light anything during Shabbat. Hence, we cannot drive on Shabbat. So they have to try and uphold that as a nation. But we're also a modern day nation. We're not a hardcore religious nation. Hence our prime minister, even if it wasn't Netanyahu or Lapid, it's not some religious rabbi as the head of the government. So I do believe they should try to introduce more reforms that do not affect the religious sectors, but in the more secular areas of Israel, like Tel Aviv, for example, Herzliya, Haifa. But it's a very delicate balance because they do have a lot of say, and they are, they do make a good chunk of the population, the religious parties and population.
So I think that might be an issue coming up with the next coalition. That's always talked about a lot, but what level, for example, Shas has an influence or not, and then certain regulations regarding the military and where the taxes go, et cetera. So that's one of the things I'd like for people to keep an eye on in the next election coming up. Again, this is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio, and our guest this evening is Jeremy Dery. So Jeremy, let's have some more fun topics. I know we discussed a lot of serious concepts. Sonny Corleone, James Caan, sorry, I refer to him as Sonny Corleone. It's my Godfather fanship. Passed away on Thursday, and I know that you met him. So I'm a big supporter of Israel, a very proud Jew. So tell us about your interactions with him.
I was working at Dan Tel Aviv about 2 years ago, right before Corona. And then James Caan came, if I'm correct, twice to the hotel for 1 week when he was shooting commercials in Israel. And he really loves the country. He kept on saying about how much he loves Israel. The first time when I came to his suite, even to help him, with minor issues like lights, for example, he's always telling me, he said, Jeremy, this country is so beautiful. I love being in Israel. I'm proud to be Jewish. I'm proud to be helping Israel. This is truly a wonderful country. And he just went on about it. And you could feel it was genuine. I mean, it's really coming from the heart. And if really had more celebrities that really coming from the heart and are passionate about Israel and want to support and share the love for Israel, I think that's the one big lesson that James Caan can give to Hollywood and also to the world, that people should really love this land, because it's truly a land of wonders. Besides all the biblical, religious, historical context, it's just literally a land full of wonders. And James Caan really represented that when he was coming in and out. And he always left, by the way, with a huge smile, whether it was early in the morning, late at night. He always had a huge smile on his face, and he was always very eager to do whatever needed to be done to promote Israel.
Wow. Well, by the way, 2 years ago, started when he was 80 years old, he had this type of energy.
Right.
Wow.
Yeah, it was like 4 years ago. But
late 70s. I mean, that's pretty impressive.
But he was extremely passionate.
So it's interesting because his Hollywood personality is such a macho guy. Mm-hmm. Killing people and beating people up. But you're saying the guy in real life, nice guy, nice, genuine, sweet guy. Yeah,
very sweet, very nice, very down to earth, very quiet. But he did say hi to everyone when he walked into the down Tel Aviv, and even outside, I heard him. When people would just walk in the street, they would ask him. He was very open. I mean, he was very friendly, extremely friendly, and it was really an honor to meet him and speak with him.
It's interesting. Despite being descended from German Jews, he was awarded Italian Man of the Year twice. I don't know if you're aware of that, but he's talked about that. And they wanted to give him the award again, and finally, he's like, I can't do this anymore. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry, but it's funny how the mind works. Where you see a guy. My dad said this as a kid. It's like, if you would see David Letterman in the street, you would think, hey, what's up? Because you think he knows you because you know him on TV. It doesn't work that way. Just whatever they're put on TV is not necessarily who they are. I mean, I'm an exception. I'm really this nice in real life. But just because James Caan is shooting people doesn't mean he's like that in real life. I don't think people realize that. So this is really an idea. Regarding...
By the way, usually one thing I've noticed with celebrities, whether it's my time in America or Israel or whatever, whenever I happen to run into a celebrity, which is not every month or every week, but whatever I do, usually when it's a celebrity that plays a very tough role on TV, usually they're very soft in real life, that there is a big... dichotomy between the roles that they portray on TV and how they are on everyday life.
Oh, very interesting. So you talk about, though, that celebrities should be more involved in Israel. You mean the Jewish celebrities? You want to see non-Jewish celebrities as well? What do you mean by that?
I want to see every celebrity being supportive and passionate about Israel. And if they're not Jewish, then they should definitely come here and see the country and visit the country. I know there's a few organizations in California, I think, that promote trips, or at least pre-corona, to Israel to show celebrities, like a mini birthright for celebrities. I know it exists. I forgot the name of it. And I'm assuming it's been frozen due to corona. And I'm assuming it maybe restarted if corona doesn't, attack the world again. But let's see what happens.
Yeah. What were the 8th wave now? I lost track.
Right.
6th wave, something like that.
Right. Sadly, with corona, the cases are increasing again to over about 10,000 cases per day in Israel. The big debate in Israel now is whether we should have masks indoors, and that the health ministry has not made an official agreement yet, but it looks more like if the cases continue to increase, that might be the first policy that will be put back in place.
Wow. So I'll have to contact that doctor that will give me an exception. I'll have to go find him again. But, we'll get to that, how that could affect tourism. But regarding celebrities, for example, 50 Cent was here earlier in the week. So do we look at that as a positive situation? Because he's not Jewish and he's representing rap music, which is not necessarily like a Jewish value thing. Mm-hmm. I know Svi knows rap music pretty well. He's really into it. But is that... Old school, but do we look at that and say 50 Cent's coming, we're happy about that, we find it kind of weird, or it doesn't matter? I mean, your opinion that that's a good thing, right? Okay, so basically, is part of that idea, because there's such a misrepresentation of Israel in the media, the idea that 50 Cent comes, there'll be people in America thinking, oh, Jews listen to rap music. That's interesting. I didn't realize that happens in Israel. Is that part of the idea?
Right. Well, I mean, I think any form of publicity for Israel is good publicity, and of course it also comes with the possibility that it could be bad publicity depending on who are his fans, if they're fans of pro-Palestinians, pro-BDS, and of course whoever comes will have those two baggages, but whoever comes also has a baggage of also having the pro-Israel side as well, and the media attention, the media wave of seeing Israel as a modern country, these rappers coming here, showing that Israelis love, modern day, and showing that the rappers themselves want to come here and show their love of music to the Israeli public. That alone speaks volumes. And it also shows that the celebrities, the ones that do come, are not scared of the pressure of not to come to Israel. And it shows that Israel's a peaceful country. That when they're coming, they're not being harassed. There's no rockets flying over their heads. They're being loved by thousands of fans. The concerts are usually a major spectacle and a huge success. And it should be more incentive for more celebrities to come, regardless of the reality what the media portrays.
Yeah, because it's interesting to bring that up because when I started Israel Sports Radio, this was about 10, 11 years ago, so I would go around booking guests and from the United States, and people would say, sometimes they would say, I didn't even know that Israel had a radio station. They sometimes think that we ride camels and that kind of thing. And Dana Jacobson from ESPN, so she was on my show back in 2009, and she basically said, I never got a phone call from this far away before. This is before the smartphone got really popular. So that's part of the idea that people can understand that Israel is a modern country. There are concerts, there's stadiums, there's these type of things. However, is there a concern that any of these actors or celebrities they would get fallback from the BDS movement? Does 50 Cent have to worry that people will boycott his album, not be performed in Israel? What would you say to that?
Right, that's always a big pressure. What are the negative pressures that these celebrities will have to encounter? Whether it's the boycotting their albums, boycotting, putting maybe financial pressure on these celebrities or blacklisting them in certain venues. But I always say, celebrity or non-celebrity, if you stand on the side of righteousness, which Israel is always, a beacon of justice and the light for the world through the many actions that we do, the person who stands with it will be greatly rewarded. And you do see that, usually the negative impact of them coming to Israel is not as big as, people think. And they are continuing their success abroad and traveling abroad and even in the States. So, success for Israel will lead to success for them in other places.
If you take a look at it, like, for example, this was a number of years ago, but there was a company called SodaStream, and they actually had a building of workers in the occupied territory across the Green Line, if you will. They got enough pressure from BDS where they fired 700 Arab employees. Mm-hmm. They opened up somewhere else in Israel and hired 700 Bedouin employees. So the BDS movement, ironically, tends to backfire on the people who are involved with it. Mm-hmm. And also, if you understand anything about the mind, if you study law of attraction and the secret of these type of things, energy flows where attention goes. If you're trying to take down Israel through this BDS movement, you're really just hurting yourself. So how come the BDS people haven't figured that out yet? I mean, that doesn't seem that hard to figure out.
Well, because they have this obsessive, compunction to hurt and delegitimize Israel at all costs. And I don't really see any rational logic behind this hatred of just, destroying the image of Israel. And ideally for them, we also to destroy the physical Israel, but since they can't do it militarily because they're just organizations, that they'll just want to destroy it as much as they can on college campuses and on the media, and to slander Israel as much as possible, no matter what the cost, because it's just, an obsessive.
Well, it's ironic that basically, if you think about it, a person actually, at least in a Western country, cannot boycott Israel. Step one would be that little chip, in the phone, or the chip where you're able to speak to people online through Messenger. That alone can't happen. It can't actually be done, period. There was a story a few years ago, Jimmy Carter took an invention made by Israel which saved his life. Mm-hmm. So, again, it's like you're saying that what they do is they just want to damage Israel, but it's such an illogical thinking, and it's kind of like anti-Semitism where they hate us because we're rich, or they hate us because we're poor, they hate us where we're religious or not religious. It's such an illogical concept, and I'm sure that you have experience dealing with people that come in, tourists and stuff, where they're seen the other way. They have an illogical love for Israel. They really love Israel in ways that don't make sense in a positive way. So tell us about some of those experiences. The people that you've seen that they love it no matter what. Even they seem to love Israel even more than some people that live here.
Right. I mean, usually it's the Christians that I've personally noticed that really when they come here, they just love Israel because it's the Holy Land, and Israel can do no wrong, and they give tons of more money than what the Jewish supporters do. But really, the Christians, like the evangelicals, even more that I noticed both in Jerusalem and in Tel Aviv. There's outpouring of love and affection and admiration. And each time that Israel gets hurt, whether it's through a legal lawsuit or militarily, they're the first ones back in the country, first ones ready to support Israel, first ones to risk whatever needs to be done to help Israel. And there's this obsession, positive obsession to help Israel, more than the Jewish supporters who, waver sometimes depending on where they are and where they come from.
So they just want to wait till the war's over, you said, yeah.
Right.
Okay, so let's do this comparison. Let's take Joe Christian, right? Big supporter of Israel, evangelical Christian type of person. And let's say like the Ben and Jerry's guys. Ben and Jerry's, if you don't know or not, was involved in a kind of a BDS thing regarding Israel. It's a little bit complicated because you could buy Ben and Jerry's in Israel and you're not part of the BDS movement, et cetera. But what would be your explanation for that? These two guys that are Jewish, and they are doing something against Israel, and then people that are not Jewish, they're doing something so pro-Israel. What, do you have an explanation? I know it's a big question. People are trying to figure that out for a long, long time. But I want to know Jeremy's thoughts about this. How would you explain it?
Well, I mean, one thing I've noticed that whenever someone tries to harm Israel, even the Ben and Jerry's, and now you can see that they're sort of hurting them back financially. That there's more boycotts, there's more demands to stop the sale of Ben and Jerry's. There's more outrage, global outrage about double standards. So indirectly, what we've noticed is really what the Bible teaches us. The biblical prophecy that if you stand with Israel, you'll be blessed. But if you harm Israel, or have intentions to harm Israel, you will be punished. And that really, that ancient prophecy seems to be carried out time and time again, and you see it nowadays on every organization or person that wants to harm Israel. In the long run, they are negatively affected by one way or another. And sadly, the evil forces of whether it's BDS organizations, whether it's ice creams, whether it's whether it's in the UN where they try to slander Israel on human rights charges, usually it backfires on them and it hurts them even more than what their original intention is. And sadly, they just don't get the wake-up call.
You talk about the United Nations, something I find almost comical. It's really scary, but in some ways somewhat comical. In 2020, the year COVID was sprung onto the world, the United Nations condemned Israel 6 times. And how many times did they condemn China? 0. That just seems impossible. Jeremy, explain this to us.
Well, China, sadly, is a major influencer in a much larger country than Israel is, so they have more pull with the various member states in the UN. But it just shows, once again, the obsessive nature of the UN, where they want to, harm and, damage Israel's credibility and its image, even if it's not factually accurate. But, each time they do it, I actually like the fact that they're gonna, harm and push Israel, because then, the forces that are pro-Israel give them the perfect opportunity to go and speak and to counter the lies and slander that the UN makes each and every time, so whether it's in the Human Rights Council, whether it's various sanctions for what's happening we're doing in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip. But every time, I think the world also needs, that small wake-up call, whether it's from the UN ambassador Gilad Erdan, or it's from the White House, or supporting Israel with whatever issue is at hand. But this is, critical that truthful piece of information that they release to the media is always displayed, no matter which, issue is being affected at the present time against Israel.
There's this idea that Israel's held to a different standard and therefore double standard. But in some ways, I almost look at it as a compliment, because if you're really going to say Israel, for example, the United Nations, I think since 1948, has 70% of the times they've condemned a country, it's been Israel. So it tells you that's not logical. But if the idea is that Israel has to be perfect, it tells you there's something behind that. If they're expecting us to be perfect, they're expecting us to be light in the nations. So that shows an example of biblical truth, biblical prophecy. So perhaps it's a compliment, this whole thing.
It is a definite compliment. It definitely shows that Israel must always, put itself on a higher moral standard than the rest of the world. But that's because we need to show the world that there is a higher moral standard, and that, we can, we can fulfill it. Whenever Israel, is on the gray zone, for example, in this recent controversy with Abu Akleh, who was the Palestinian journalist that sadly got killed, and the big controversy is who killed her, whether it's us or the Palestinian forces. We apologize, whether we did it or we didn't do it, but we take actions. We want the world to know that we don't hide from our mistakes, but we definitely try to improve ourselves. But at the same time, we have this very strong moral standards that spreads throughout the nation, especially in the army, and that is exemplified throughout the world, and even various international armed forces look up on the IDF because of that higher moral standard as well. And that's what we are. We are a beacon of light to the world.
So this is what I quoted this lecture a few years ago, where the following will sound a little bit more, but try to stay with me, audience. So most militaries, no matter who they are, at some point in war, the soldiers sometimes, unfortunately, rape the women of the countries they invade. That is a natural thing in history. The Torah even talks about it. There's this concept of that if you do it, you have to marry her. This whole thing, the Devarim, it's a very interesting story. So someone asked the question, you don't hear cases of IDF soldiers raping Palestinian women, never. In fact, there was a study done about this about 10 years ago. They're like, this has happened 0 times. What's going on? And the person writing it concluded, it must be the Israelis dislike the Palestinians so much they don't even want to rape their women. Pretty insane thought. I don't tend to think that's what happened. I tend to think that it is like you're talking about a beacon of light, and they're trying to show the nations you can have a military that defends itself and still does it with honor. It still does it without breaking rules, and still does it, keeps in mind the safety of even the people they're attacking. Right. Sending out letters in advance. We're about to bomb this place, this time, this date. Get the people out of there. Right. Is there been anything like that in history besides us?
No. The IDF really is a unique army, and the commanders in the IDF, really stress and impose every single time. The moral code that the IDF must follow, strict moral code, also because the IDF is not only in charge of, their own reputation and, what happens in the Palestinian territories, but they know that the world is watching everything that the IDF does. And because of that, the IDF, will do as much as they can to ensure that that higher morality status will always be upheld first and foremost. Whether it's even raping sadly women in territories of conflict, which sadly happens all throughout history, and happened in Afghanistan, happened in Iraq, and happened in various other violent hotspots, which you do not see in Israel or in the Palestinian territories. And it just shows once again a living example of what the IDF stands for.
Remember, the name of the IDF is Israel Defense Force. The goal is not to invade other countries and take their land like sometimes armies tend to do. Mm-hmm. Bill Maher is not the most religious guy out there, but pro-Israel, he said something interesting, that Israel has to be undefeated in its wars. They have to go 8-0. If they're 8-1, there's no Israel. Israel loses war, they don't exist. You can't say that with other countries, obviously. This is the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports and News Radio, also on YouTube as well. The email is arilewishow@hotmail.com. And our guest this evening is Jeremy Dery. So, Jeremy, tell us a bit about, obviously, you do a lot of work at the King David Hotel, very historic place because, first of all, it was bombed when Israel, in the beginning, not actually Israel itself, but you're going different organizations were trying to try to keep Jews safe. Historically, it's very important. Also, that is the place where generally presidents stay at, top diplomats, etc. So give us your point of view, what it's like to be there and be a part of the history, not just what happened in the past, but modern day. A lot of great things going on there.
The King David Hotel has been, it's the oldest hotel in all of Israel from 1931 up until the present day, and it really follows the spectrum of the rebirth of Israel. And all throughout the years, especially after 1948, the King David was the sole hotel that hosted all these international global leaders, and we hosted them in the suites. And the hotel really is, you have to pick one building in the entire land of Israel, what can exemplify really Israel and the history and everything that went through to rebuild Israel. And the glory of Israel of 1948 until this present day, it's really the King David Hotel, which still stands in its majestic form in Jerusalem on King David Street. And literally time and time again, we have, world leaders, flock into the King David for government meetings in Israel and also government meetings at the King David. And I highly recommend that the world come and just see and stay even at the King David to feel that, historic, it's just, it really is really a historic punch, you can say, to the gut when you actually just walk in and you see, that, in the lobby, this is where government meetings took place. The Jordanian peace agreement was signed at the King David, and the table right next to the lobby. We hosted the first Arab flag during the Egyptian peace treaty in the 70s. So whatever happens in Israel proper, somehow it's affected within the internal halls of the King David. And it's truly a wonder. There's
also this walkway where a lot of the famous people that stayed there, they put a handprint. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. So some people that have stayed there, I know President Obama was there even before he was president, because in 2006, remember the hand stamp. But tell us some of the people that have stayed there throughout the years.
Well, the walkway is the signatures, so that people sign the guest book, and then electronically we put it on the floor, and we update the floor every few months to replenish the names. But you've had every major leader, including Gal Gadot, the new Wonder Woman, who has stayed there, and she signed the guest book, and you see it. Catherine Zeta-Jones was there. Christopher Reeves, that we know, was there before he passed away. I went saw pictures of him at the Kotel as well as the Western Wall. Every world leader, has been there. Every American U.S. president has been there, and it just shows the importance and the majestic, figure of the King David, that this is a place where world leaders choose to reside since in the 1950s until the present day, and it's now 90 years old, and it's still standing.
Basically, every American president that's come to Israel since the 50s has been to the King David, basically.
I think so. Maybe it was before, but I think at least since
the 50s. It's pretty incredible. So part of the history of it also, the view, you literally see the old city from there. Then if you turn the other way, you see the modern part of Jerusalem. That's part of the aspects as well?
Right. Since the King David physically is situated right between the old city and the new city of Jerusalem, which is the YMCA and everything past the building of the YMCA, you see really the whole old city of Jerusalem, even on the terrace or in the rooms. And then, of course, depending on the allocation we are, you can also see the new city and everything that, modern day Jerusalem has to offer, which is equally as beautiful and stunning.
So what I kind of want to conclude is this: we have a lot of things going on in the world. Obviously, there's a lot of turmoil. Talk about COVID potentially coming back. Iran is building up a regime. Do you see, or how do you see, a light at the end of the tunnel, a way that we can get peace through in the Middle East and have the ripple effects go throughout the whole world? And regarding COVID, inventing whatever needs to be invented to solve it, or whatever needs to be done in that respect. What is a positive way you could see all this kind of being solved out?
Really, the world leadership must come together along with the leaders of Israel to sit down and talk about a actual peace for us and the Palestinians. Also, Israel is also a beacon of light for medicine progress, whether it's confronting COVID or it's confronting other medical diseases in the world. And, if someone, I think, will beat COVID, and besides the Pfizer vaccines and the different vaccines that are out there, the Sputnik as well from Russia, my bet probably would be on the Israeli scientists that could, find that miracle cure for COVID, because it's going to last, I'm sure, a while. But the world leaders need to break the two-state paradigm, because sadly, time in history shows it's just not working. We're still in the same place. Maybe less violence, but we're still in the same place. And they need to come up with a new creative solution, and they also have to come up with a new solution how to tackle the terrorism in this region, which the head is Iran, which is actually trying to build a nuclear weapon. And they need to be stronger to enforce and to ensure a collective punishment that the Iranian government cannot build a nuclear weapon, and they'll be punished if they do. So I think there just be a new thinking paradigm globally with Israel at the forefront, discussing and thinking all these different ideas of what this new paradigm will be for the upcoming years.
That's scarcely about Joe Biden and his visit, because Joe Biden served under President Obama, and the last thing basically Obama did, significant-wise, was to fund Iran. And I don't know if Biden is coherent of what's going on or not, but the idea would be if he's going to continue that platform and help Iran, that wouldn't be good. Is there a way that the political leadership could talk to President Biden and explain to him, do not do that?
Right. Well, I think the big blessing we have with Yair Lapid, who's the current prime minister for the next months until November, is that they're friends. They share the same ideology, and Lapid knows full well that Iran is a major menace, and they cannot acquire a nuclear weapon. They cannot even get to the threshold of getting a nuclear weapon. And we're at the point that Iran is covertly getting to that threshold very fast. And that is one of the things that will be discussed during this recent visit is between Lapid and the President Biden is how to tackle the Iran nuclear deal. Should they continue? Should they stop? How to enforce it? And the mechanisms. So regardless, Israel will continue to do what it can to protect itself against all aggressive forces, and they're doing a wonderful job. And we're all very happy living in Israel. I actually feel very safe and happy being here.
Yeah, it's incredible. Time and time again, I'll get some messages from my friends in the United States asking me if I feel scared here. I'm like, I think the question should be in reverse, actually. No offense to my friends out there. And I'll also ask you a question regarding Israel inventions. There's apparently an invention out there, Israeli made, to print food, where I don't understand all the details behind it, but there is this idea that there's apparently a messianic prophecy that Jews will eat pork after the Messiah comes, and Jews will be vegetarian. And I was thinking, I don't know how that's possible, but if somebody's printing pork, that technically would fulfill both things. Mm-hmm. Are we going to get to that point where there's a printer in a person's room that just prints out pork, and we look at this delicious pork we're eating? You think we'll get to that point?
Maybe, but I don't really like to tamper with the whole laws of Judaism. I mean, whether it's finding new inventions to bypass the strict laws that the Jews have upheld for thousands of years, but and then if the certain elements within Israel trying to get to the Messianic era in a faster way, it could backfire and have much more tensions and violence, unpredictable violence in the region. So I would say that if they want to print pork, whatever, then go ahead. But as a Jew who doesn't respect and value the laws and traditions, I will stay away from it.
All right, you're not eating any printed pork anytime soon. All right, fair enough with that. If you have questions about printed pork, you can email arilewishow@hotmail.com. This has been another episode of the Ari Lewis Show here on Israel Sports News Radio, and our guest this evening has been Jeremy Dery. So, Jeremy, what would be the best way people could find out more about what you do, about your work? Where should they go?
Very simple. I'm on Facebook, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Instagram. Jeremy Dery, that's the name for all three. And it's been an honor and pleasure. I'll send you details about Israel, life in Israel, and there's a whole gamut of, wealth of information that comes with now over 10 years of living in Israel. And it'll be an honor and pleasure to share with you. Thank you for, watching this and becoming more enlightened about, what Israel's facing nowadays. And we want more and more international tourists to Israel. There's a lot to do and a lot to see.
Absolutely take advantage of being able to do that now, because you never know when the airport's closed. So do not take it for granted. Thank you, everybody, for watching, and God bless, and good night.
Good night. Mm-hmm.